you, Karen, for that wonderful introduction to your organization, which sounds totally terrific. And thank you, Jeff, for saying all those things. You know, it reminded me of my long biography, which is accurate, actually. Karen and I have this actually word in common. We discussed the etymology of it last night. It comes from Ted Berrigan, New York poet via Rhode Island and Oklahoma, and a contagious speaker. I met Ted when I was 19 years old in New York City, and I didn't speak a whole lot of English, so hearing a guy talk with great authority and saying things like actually and terrific made a huge impression on me. Then, poor vocabulary and psyche. Well, actually, my psyche was rich. My vocabulary was poor. My publisher is here, Gabriel Levinson of Anti-Book Club, and he published Bibliodeath, my life with my archives with Life in Footnotes, which is my last book and sort of a book that kind of returns me to this idea of being a kid, because I feel like I can write anything I want to, because I'm not doing it for any pecuniary reason, or I'm not teaching anymore. I don't have, any kind of sense of anyone watching. So I say things and then I think about what I said. Very few people have the luxury of doing it all the time. And then when I think about what I just said, and I think, well, maybe I should have said this other thing, because maybe it's not like what I just said. And so, in writing this book, I wrote a main text about one of the big central questions of our time, which is what happens to the book when it becomes pixels on the internet, and what does that mean, actually. And so there is an essay about that, but then while I was writing it, I was also thinking about how I started writing it and how my life as a writer went. And those thoughts became footnotes. And so I was writing two books at the same time. I was writing a memoir in footnotes, and then I was, speculating, mildly, in a mildly intelligent manner on what had happened to this business of mine, to this activity that I practice. So Bibliodeath is an interesting book, and I love it, and I know I love it because I didn't get bored reading the proofs 9 times. So Gabriel made notes and he sent me back the corrections. I kept reading it with some degree of interest and amazement. This is great. It's like reading, a great book by somebody else, which is one of the few books I didn't try to be somebody else. I sort of discovered this business of main text and footnotes in a prior book called About 1001 Nights. It's called Whatever Gets You Through the Night, a story of Scheherazade and the Arabian entertainment. A title, by the way, which belongs to Richard Burton, one of the great translators of the night, and not to myself, as some, people were quick to point out, because Arabian entertainment sounds slightly politically incorrect, but that's what Burton called it, and since he is a great character in the book, I followed him, and he also taught me about footnotes, because this book, his translation of 1001 Nights, was published by subscription. It was a private publication. Nobody would touch it because of what they conceived as vulgarity and too much sex, or both. And it was not published in its entirety until 19 46 by Heritage Editions, and Burton took the liberty, because he was free to do whatever he wanted to in this book, to elaborate in his footnotes on his own experiences as an Arabist and an adventurer, and you know, really a great linguist. And so that book, you know, in addition to being a great translation into English and a great story of Burton's adventures, was a license to feel free to do that. So I discovered that there, and now I'm addicted to the idea that you can actually do something and think something else and get that in too if you write a footnote. So I thought what I'll do tonight, actually, besides talking about the book, because it's prose, you know, there's probably nothing deadlier to read than prose. Although, you know, you know, this is the book. But also at the same time, I had this book of poems, of selected poems, which is called So Recently Rent a World. My publisher had difficulty with it. Other people did too because of the word rent. And they all said, well, why don't you call it So Recently a Rent World? And I said, well, that's not what it is, because the word rent means also torn and ripped in English. And so the meaning was distinctly, I mean, the phrase is a little stilted, but the word meant distinctly torn, as well as rent. I.e., in 1965, my apartment in New York was $60, and it's now $5,000. So. But yes, recently it was a rent world, but it was also a world that was torn. And it was torn by great things, by all kinds of events. Torn for me by the fall of communism, by the tearing of the Iron Curtain in Romania, which I covered for NPR and ABC News. It was torn by the sort of change and sudden, spectacular transformation of the book because of the internet, by the change of our entire world because of the internet, about all kinds of new ideas that actually tore a lot of what we thought about many things. And so it is so recently a rent world. And the rent world. So I was going to read a few poems and then we'll have a conversation. So these